Hello and welcome to the Thomas Marathon Podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with marathon dreams. Episode 80, The Dark Side of Marathons, which, I'll be honest, I've taken that from a post I saw on Instagram, The Dark Side of Marathons, and it was interesting because it was talking about that you don't have to do marathons and things like that, which I think is an interesting conversation to have around runners and how we perceive what success looks like and things like that. But that's just to go off on a tangent. The reason I've called it this today is because, as you may know, if you listened to this podcast before, I'm currently in week 6 of my marathon training. It's starting to come together now after those early wobbles, as we talked about on previous episodes in the podcast. And after speaking to a few people that I work with directly, I'm helping them for their spring marathon. There are things that I have talked about before on this podcast, but I want to kind of bring it together a little bit. And when I say dark side, what I want to talk about is more about how we feel about marathons, because particularly marathon training. And I've been getting quite passionate recently about my delivery and how I help people with marathon training, because what I'm trying to do here is almost pan for gold with the information that's out there and say, right, here is what I believe to be the simplest way to train for a marathon, because I've trained for 50 marathons, and some of those marathons I had virtually no training plan, no structure, but also not a lot of information to cloud my judgment, which in fact helped me in a lot of respects. And when we see comparison and when we see information, it clouds a lot of the judgment and it clouds a lot of progress, because we don't do the work. We spend too much time caught up in analysing versus doing, which I've said before and I'll keep saying. So hopefully if you are a regular listener to this podcast, this will hopefully give you some reassurance about your mindset when you are going through a marathon training process, because this is what some of you will realise, particularly if you're doing a marathon in the spring, and that's a big marathon like a London or something like that where it's quite iconic and there's a big fanfare around it, is that day itself, for most people, irrespective of how fast or slow or whatever that might be, is amazing, because it's the whole thing that comes with that day itself. There's fanfare, the setup, the nostalgia, the prestige, whatever word you want to use to describe it, it's a fantastic experience. Marathon training is not always a fantastic experience. Now, unless you are a conditioned runner who's trained for multiple marathons, who almost understands how this all works, it can be very challenging, particularly for new runners. And I talk a lot to brand new marathon runners, not necessarily new runners per se, but new marathon runners. And my job is not to scare them, but to set them up. So like I've said before, when they stand up to that start line, they are fully in control and they're like, I've got this. Now, you don't know what's going to happen after that start line, as we said before, but when you step up to that start line, you're like, right, I've got this. So when I say the dark side, I mean the things that go through your mind during the process. And I'll tell you a conversation I had this morning with somebody who's doing London Marathon in April. Was basically, I would be more surprised if a first-time marathoner came to me and said, during the training process, I'm completely in control and I'm feeling great. What I'm used to hearing is, I'm kind of overwhelmed, I am tired, I'm struggling to fit my runs in, and I'm not looking forward to my long run, or I'm not doing as well as I think I should be. Now, what happens here is, as you will hopefully have heard if you've listened to my podcast, The Resentful Runner, is I think if you're doing marathon training correctly and you're fairly new to marathons, there will be a point during that marathon training cycle when you dislike running a little bit, because you'll be like, oh, I've got to go out again. I'll give you an example. This week for me, I have done my really hard runs in terms of pace work. So I class the pace work side of things as the hardest run. I'm okay with long distance because I can fuel correctly and I understand how it goes, and I'm not running as fast as I would on, say, an interval or a tempo session or whatever you want to call it. So this week I'm like, had an easiest run today, easiest run tomorrow. I'm like, and breathe, because I know that the real load for this week is over. I've just got to do a big long run on Sunday, which again is classed as a low aerobic or slow run, so it won't be too bad. And because I did 16 miles last week, it's only 18 miles this week, only in context to 16. I mean, it's not that much of a jump, so I'll be able to negotiate that, I'm sure. But my speed work bit's done. Now, I class speed work as really, really hard. The 18 miles is going to be hard, but it won't be as hard for me as doing faster pace stuff. Anyway, after that tangent, but I'm still in the place where I'm like, oh, thank heavens that bit's over, so I can now focus on the next bit. So if you're at a place where, which a lot of you may be, because we're sort of coming towards the end of January as I record this, where you are resenting running a little bit, or you're resenting the next run, that's normal. My advice to the person I spoke to this morning, which I'll share today, is do not suppress that resentment and pretend it's not there. You need to sit with it and be comfortable with it. You need to accept that it's okay as a human to be resentful about this process because it's hard. Now, what can happen, particularly with bigger marathons like your Londons of the world or similar, where people do it for charity, is then they get resentment, and then another thing that makes it even worse, which is guilt, and they feel guilty because they're doing it for a charity. I shouldn't feel this way because I'm running for a charity. That's kind of irrelevant in the context of the work that you're doing. And let me explain that. So that's great. And of course, that's a really good thing to do. I've done it myself. It's fantastic. But that's different to the training cycle, because the training cycle is going to be hard, whether you're doing that run for charity or not. And what you need to do is separate those two things out and say, I accept that this is hard, and I accept that I'm going to find it challenging. Okay. And that's okay, and forgive yourself for that, okay, if you're going through that process. If you're at a point where you think you've not had the best week possible, forgive yourself for that. You've got 14, 15 other weeks to make up for it, yeah? Or however long you've got left. So this is a marathon, not a sprint, pun intended, whereas you can make up for any missed weeks or missed runs, okay? So feeling guilty or resentful is okay, but you can't stay there. You have to flip that switch and say, right, how do I solve this, or how do I move on to the next thing? Because the darkness, or the shadow as I'm going to call it here, is the resentment. That's normal, and if you suppress it or pretend it's not there or constantly vent it, it's going to make it worse. Yeah, because if you constantly talk about a problem, you get more problem, or you think about more problem. So if you're constantly going about how hard it all is all the time, then it's going to continue being hard because you get what you focus on. Yes, what you need to do is accept that sometimes, yes, it's going to be challenging. Yes, you're going to have to move things around a little bit. Yes, you're going to struggle, but that's okay, because that's part of the training process, and it tells me that you're doing it correctly. I'm more concerned when people say marathon running is easy. Because for someone it might be. For the people that I work with and talk to, it's certainly not easy, and you have to accept that. So it's forgive yourself and then find a solution. So for example, a few weeks ago when it snowed, for me, I had the same thoughts as most people have in this process, which is, oh no, everything's going to fall to pieces because it's snowed, it's ice, and every time I see even a little bit of snow on the forecast, I'm like, right, that's it, I'm going to miss all my runs. It doesn't work like that, and if you keep doing the work, it will compound and you will improve. But the most important thing you can do if you are having a bit of a wobble, or you have struggled on certain elements of your training, is to forgive yourself for feeling a bit down or resenting it, because that's normal. It is normal to look at a plan and go, oh, I've got to go out again, because you're doing it right, because that means you're doing the volume and the load you need to do to get the results that you need. Okay, marathon training is about load and it's about volume, in my experience. Yes, I don't think that a recreational runner doing their first marathon can cheat the system. I think somebody can make shortcuts if they've got a lot of experience and conditioning, yes, because you know what that distance feels like. I don't think it's possible for a first-time marathon runner to cheat the system, because you need to understand what the load and volume feels like so you can manage the difficult spots of a marathon. Okay, so what I'm talking about here when it's a dark, not the obvious stuff. Marathons are long distance. Correct. There's a lot of training involved. Correct. You need to understand fueling properly. Correct. You need to get your rest and recovery, particularly if you're over 35. Correct. But what you also need to deal with is the mental sort of ping pong that goes on in your head about the whole process, because it is challenging and it is difficult, and there's nothing wrong with you for saying that you're struggling or asking for help, because it is a difficult process, and sometimes you do need that little bit of reassurance or support to be heard, to be coached, to be moved forward. A lot of the work that I honestly do in my coaching program is about mindset, because as you've heard me say before, the stuff for me is fairly irrelevant. Running plans are running plans. Most decent running plans will get you the time you want. If you're an athlete, you won't be listening to this, but for most of us who are recreational, who are just looking to run a marathon and do it in the time that we feel is acceptable, Most running plans will get that done for you. It's just how you want to optimize that process. That's as simple as it gets, right? It's not complicated. The real work, I think, is around understanding the process when you slowly build up and you're worried that you're not doing enough, to then hitting the peak weeks, doing the volume, and then thinking, oh, this is a lot, I'm getting overwhelmed. So here's how, some practical tips to overcome that darkness and that shadow. Point 1, we've talked about it, we'll reiterate it. Accept you are going to feel resentful sometimes and overwhelmed. Forgive yourself for it. Change the thought. How do I move on from this? What's the solution? But forgive yourself for feeling that way. That's normal to feel that way. Don't suppress it. Don't tell everybody. Don't vent. Don't spread the word so it compounds. Just accept it. Move on. Point 2 is do not look at future weeks or cut-off points for races or any of that yet. If you're weeks away, do the next run, do the next week, because that's going to help you to take one step at a time. That's how you do this. One run, one step at a time. Don't look at the race or the cut-offs or any of that. It will be in the future, because you'll stay in the future and you'll suffer from anxiety. The key is to say, right, all I need to do is my next run, especially if you've missed one. Just say, how do I get to my next run as quick as possible? And if you do that, you'll be absolutely fine. It's about taking one step at a time. The third thing to do is to get around people similar to you, so they can show some empathy. Because if you're around people who are seasoned, conditioned athletes, maybe done multiple marathons, it's going to be very hard for them to empathise with somebody who's going through this process and struggling. You do not want to be around people who find running easy. Now, there's nothing wrong with finding running easy. Fair play to you, that's you. Or finding running comfortable, or somebody who's in a different situation. But if you're around people in a different situation to you, who perhaps aren't experiencing your challenges, it's going to be harder to find people to connect with and share those experiences. So whilst we don't want to excessively complain or vent about our struggles, it is good sometimes just to have a sounding board of people around you who understand exactly what you're going through. And that's what I do in my community here. Everybody's pretty much in the same boat. And actually, to be truthful, the times are fairly irrelevant that people run, because everybody's in the same situation. Okay? So the dark side of marathons for me, or the shadow side of marathons, is dealing with the lows during marathon training when it all gets a bit much, because it does. But the key is simplicity. Get yourself some simple solutions to get yourself out of it so you can move forwards. And that's the best advice I can give you. If you look for solutions, that's a courage-based mindset, and courage is the first positive step towards change, okay? But give yourself a break first, and really importantly, forgive yourself for having those feelings, because those feelings are normal, okay? It's absolutely normal to feel that way. Get yourself together, as it were, and say, right, how do I get onto my next run? Because I promise you, you're normally only the next run away from feeling a lot better. Okay, so nice and simple, that's it. That's the dark side of marathons. If you're going to the running show, if you're here in the UK, tomorrow, I'll be there tomorrow lunchtime-ish, here in the UK in Birmingham, not too far from where I live. So keep an eye out for me there. As always, if you're brand new to the podcast, please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Share the podcast with your friends. That really, really helps me as well. Or comment. And if you do like the podcast, one thing that's really, really helpful if you're a long-time listener is reviewing the podcast and dropping a quick review about what you think. I do appreciate that. It really, really helps me. If you want to join my free running community, all you need to do is hop over to Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon, click the link in my bio, and you can join my free running community over there. And of course, if you want to follow me on Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon, you can get all your free daily content and tips, and you can be with me on my own marathon journey as well, and see how I do it and how I manage all these things. So there you go. That's the dark side of marathons. If you are marathon training, keep going. It all comes together, I promise. If you do the work, you'll get there. Let's do it together. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll speak to you all very soon indeed.